to the Locker Room, brought to you by the Tech Locker, protecting your technology investment. Like, subscribe, leave us your comments, join in the debates. You know what to do. Hit all the right buttons around the screen. You guys know what to do. Did you know 75 to 95% of new product launches will fail to meet their objectives? Did you know that? Did you also know that as of last year in the UK, there are approximately twice as many male entrepreneurs as there are female? Interesting. Today's guest, Christina, she's very well placed to talk us through all of this and either debunk the facts or underline them, tell us where we're all going wrong. Senior product leader, been around the technology, knows her way through all of this stuff. There's nobody better placed. I'll let her introduce herself. Welcome to the Locker Room, Christina.
Thank you very much, Neil. Big responsibility there. But yeah, so I have been within the tech and digital product space the last, almost 20 years. I'm quite sector agnostic, sort of been up through the ranks, started out as a business analyst and, been at director level in big corporations. And I've also consulted for a number of years. So I've seen the ugly and the beautiful, I think, amongst us. Thank you for having me.
Oh no, it's absolutely our pleasure. I'm looking forward to this one immensely. Before we go any further, we're going to cover a whole bunch of topics where I think, running very deeply through yourself, like you say, is that kind of product leadership, been in and around that strategizing, transformational change piece. If you had to define product or a product business, maybe, what would you wrap that as?
Well, I think there's a difference between product and product management, if you like. So I think most businesses are product businesses because it's really about, an offering you have to an end user. So that kind of more or less covers everything from your local government to, your big sort of Amazons of the world. There is an element of you're creating something and you're putting it out there for an end user. So I think then there's obviously various ways of doing good product management or product management within that. And that's kind of, if you look at, if I think of companies, not specific companies, but how you do that well is looking after, your business really as service design holistically, everything from, your customer interaction through to your tech stack, and how do you kind of, in many ways drive, not just in a capitalist sense, if you like, but how do you drive the most value out of what you have? And that probably sounds a little bit cynical, but I guess that's a way of summing it up in terms of how do you get the best out of your people and what you're offering, and look after that, obviously.
Value is most definitely something we're going to come back to, because that's one of those beautiful words that everyone has their own definition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is there such a thing as a bad idea in your experience, from what you've seen? Is there such a thing as a bad idea, or is there simply bad strategy or execution?
I would say those things go hand in hand. I think there are bad ideas. So I think I can think of an example that's relatively recent, and the landscape will be changing now with AI coming in. But if we're thinking of things like chatbots, in customer service functions, they are in reality very good ideas. They hit some very obvious metrics for the people that are interacting with the customers, in terms of taking their call handling, reducing those numbers. But, we're not necessarily looking at that's what your users are after or customers want. So, as I said, my recent example is that we were trying to get rid of some of the things that were actually causing friction in the first place, and for customers to, to actually contact kind of said customer service center, which, we weren't really successful with. The company was very adamant they wanted this chatbot in place. So I think, it's more about when do you execute those things and against what metrics, and really who are you serving with your ideas. I think that's kind of one that kind of springs to mind when we're talking strategy, bad idea, and actually kind of perhaps weaves into as well when you apply technology and in what way really for what user. Yeah.
Well, I mean that's a deep vein in itself, isn't it? And
Yeah.
so been in and around the tech business from one side or another, very similar time frame to yourself. What shifts have you seen? You touched on AI a moment ago.
Yeah.
Is that the biggest disruptor you've seen? What have been the real sort of shifts in the sand?
I think it would be trellis not to talk about AI, but I think the biggest disruptor around that is really about the chat that's happening within our industries at the moment. I think AI in one form or another have been around since the kind of 50s, 60s, and obviously now we have, the capabilities to really make use of it in many places. I don't know the kind of disruption it's going to make. I think I'll watch it with kind of apprehension. If I'm honest, I think it's exciting, but I also worry because I think we'll build in our biases and discrimination, which we're seeing in some usage already. If we talk surveillance, we're talking language models where we're training our technology on existing data that has all our biases in there. I think where I'm perhaps more excited and follow more is maybe in a less sort of consumer facing or less obvious space, is much more around the climate space. I think we're looking at getting breakthroughs around how do we decompose some of these forever chemicals, how do we kind of decompose some of all the plastic pollution we have out there. So I think those things are really exciting, perhaps less consumer facing at the moment. But I think those will be big disruptors the next kind of 10 years, hopefully.
And as a consultant,
Yeah.
where do you even start to take a new client on that journey? How do you even get them to listen to you?
Well, I think, get to listen to me. I think, first of all, when you are a consultant in the space I've been in, which, for the record is sort of largely around change. I sort of hesitate to say transformation because I think that's another one to perhaps maybe put to rest as a terminology. I think that kind of brings about an awful lot of not so healthy behaviors, and I think it can make existing staff feel quite undervalued and unheard or not listened to. So I think we also got to realize after the best sort of part of 20 years now, is just technology evolution, and sometimes we take bigger steps and need to take bigger steps than previously perhaps. So sorry, that was just my soapbox on transformation. But I guess in reality I'm in that space, so so I go on the price that obviously if they wanted to engage someone like me, or I'm part of the team that they've already engaged because they want that change. I think for me the first thing is to understand where is that coming from, who's leading that within your organization, who's bought in, and perhaps who's more skeptical. And I think one of the things I try and do well, and I certainly things in my more senior career pride myself on, is to try and apply a more situational leadership in that space. So who do I need to perhaps work a bit harder on in terms of understanding why are they perhaps skeptical or don't see the need for this? And how do I kind of bring them on as allies versus people who are really bought in? And how do I best get them, to feel even more involved and work with me or with us if we come in as a wider team? And that could be everything from, some teams feel they already do it well. Some teams, as I said, feel already they haven't been listened to. So how can I amplify their voice and feel like I'm actually working as much for them as I am for a potential boss that has hired me to come in, so understand that landscape first of all. I think for me technology is people in, people out, so I think that's kind of where you need to start and end. And then you kind of figure out how can we go from there. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question, Neil?
Yeah, no, it does. It absolutely does. And you're giving me so many different things to come back to. It's hard to know where to start. I think that's really interesting because you are having to come at it both ways. Like you say, you kind of not, from a team perspective, you're with them. You're trying to highlight to them how that evolution, how that next step and that change is the right way to do it, and then it's not just something being done by sort of senior management, if you like. And then at the senior management level, you're trying to drive the consumer demands and the expectations of market and the team as well. Consumer demands must have changed significantly over the years, right? How do you keep pace with that?
Mm, I think the problems are the same. I think the challenges are the same. I think we are wanting more convenience. We want it faster. We want less friction in everything we do. So I'm not necessarily think that that has changed really in many ways. Um, I think in many ways technology has made, if I think about it from a more commercial perspective, and I've done, as you know, despite working across many sectors, I've done quite a bit in the e-commerce space. E-commerce has become so much easier if you want to do it quicker, because it's very formulaic now. You have the Shopifys of this world. When I started out at ASOS almost 20 years ago, we built all of these things from scratch. And you're like, oh my God, who, and now I click on a button in Shopify and it exists, which is one of the later things I've done. And I'm like, this is, if you take a step back, that's kind of mind blowing and quite exciting. But I think it can also perhaps be slightly boring for the people working on it, because you're now just integrating, right? But kind of back to consumer demand, I think it's more about it has actually become more formulaic. So I think people's expectations are, of course, to the standard that, they want either free returns, or they want to be able to buy with, their phones and, those kind of things. I think where we're therefore kind of lacking, and it is happening, and it's been happening the last many, sort of 5-10 years, but is in the wider kind of public sectors and public services. We do want the same as we get from our e-commerce kind of experience, right? We expect that things from our local council is digitalized, all those kind of things. I think we want more of. But I also think we see a wave the other way, where there is a lot, again, I'm London based, so perhaps I am, again, also my own biases in terms of what happens elsewhere. I appreciate that. But, I think people also want to have a mixed experience of a bricks and mortar and an online. I think we're also seeing, at least, let's be honest, a middle class, want a return to having more town centres and more kind of a mixed experience. And, and that's expensive for businesses, because we do buy so much online, all of us. So I think it's much more individual these days than perhaps when we had that first big wave kind of 15 years ago, when everyone jumped on, it's got to be online, all of it. So perhaps less technology, but more experience led, I'd say. Does that make sense?
And how do you stop your own bias coming into that? Because, like you say, we're all consumers of one or another, right? How do you stop your own bias influencing direction?
Yeah. It is difficult. You really got to watch yourself. I think there are various ways you can do that. I think first of all, it's listening to your customers. I think that's an obvious one. That's kind of 101. You have to have a broad engagement with a broad segment of your consumers and potential consumers as well. Who are the people that are not using your products and why, potentially. Then it's also about your team makeup. When let's not make it tokenistic, but let's make sure we have diversity in our teams. Overused word, but nonetheless, really important. I'm a white North European woman, right? So from a middle class background ish, so how do you kind of how do you complement it with your team in that way? And where do you perhaps buy in information otherwise, be it data about your market, data about your kind of demographic. I think that's one way. I think another way, when you go to a more nitty gritty, and that kind of also feeds in a little bit to how, in later years, in terms of trying to build what I would call psychological safety in your teams, you let's kind of critique ideas, directions. If you have a larger team, it's more difficult if there's only one or two of you, but come up with a product idea or whatever, and kind of make your team go, okay, tell me why this is a bad idea. Try and do some kind of impact scanning on it. In terms of, always go for the ball, not the player. You might have heard me say that before. But how do we kind of try and get a bit more robustness and cover, all the angles of our thinking? It's some of the ways that I attempt to, to kind of combat, biases and things like that.
It's a word you hear a lot, isn't it? And I think because of the prevalence of AI and data, and you touched on data a moment, about bringing data into the business.
Yeah.
I hear it a lot that I could just go out and buy that data set, right? I can just go out and buy that model or whatever it might be. And that is true. But when you take a step back, it doesn't feel like that's a massive shift from where we've ever been. I think it's a bit like diagnosis of some serious illness. I think these days we're better placed to be able to do that, but it's kind of always been a thing, right? So as data in the industries you've worked across, has that always been a thing that you can utilize from a market perspective?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think when I first started out, things like data analytics were really in its infancy. So, I'm not going to lie and go, we did it from day dot at ASOS, because we didn't, because it wasn't really in place. It became in place, and we didn't really need to, because we were very successful, and then all of a sudden, you start having other, competitors pop up, right? And obviously you should be data informed. So it has been from relatively early days. I'd say we were quite quick on it, but I think it's important. I think the thing now is, like, as you said, and as we touched upon earlier, these things are new. I think the thing is, it's now happening at at scale and at a speed that obviously we haven't seen before and haven't been capable of doing before. And I think that's where we can amplify all our isms, and that's what we need to watch out for. And I really think that isn't something that's talked enough about in our industry as a mainstream, the responsibility we all have. We sort of see, ethical tech or this and the other is only in an NGO space or only in a maybe government space or whatever. But I think we do all carry a responsibility to really look at how we build our technology from a inclusive manner. And I don't think we're very good at it, and that's down to what I would have hoped would have been such standards these days to, make our technology accessible. Still in this day and age, you go into organizations and they haven't thought about really basic accessibility in their code, in their software, in their technology. And I think that's, I don't think we take that responsibility and that kind of care seriously enough, if I'm honest.